It's a pleasure for me to participate in this workshop and just give you a synopsis of what the objectives are of the policy document and where we want to be. And just real quick, by a show of hands of persons who drive. I think it's safe to say everybody in here drives. No, just to give you a quick story, it's not that living in China for some time, working in China and going to school in China, I realized we are actually at a huge advantage. As simple as driving a car. It's a lot of people in China, they have the money, can afford a car. But the simple fact is they cannot buy the car. Take, for example, Shanghai, where before you purchase a car, you have to have proper justification as to why you need a car. In addition to that, you have to bid on those license plates, which in some cases end up costing more than even the car. So is it worth it? Okay, so we are here, I say that to say this, that in Jamaica, we're in a beautiful island that surrounded by sea. We have sufficient land space, can build how we want to. And sometimes instead of changing the menu, the recipe, we have to change the menu. And this comes from the policy level, where we have to implement policies and initiatives that drive a green economy. Now, just to move into the presentation, as much as 90% of building environmental impact comes from energy use during its lifetime. And in Jamaica, a lot of us are concerned with the 25% of costs, which is the developmental cost in the operation of the building. So in the development fees, the total cost is about 25% of what the building will cost over the life cycle. So it's important for us to focus more on the life cycle cost than, say, the initial cost. And this is one reason why Jamaicans, we're not fully there to take up the strategies and initiatives that are in place for energy efficient building, because they're looking at the immediate cost. But there is a low cost, no cost strategy for doing that. And we have to look at issues such as passive design strategies. Now, for the overview, we're going to look at the policy approach and strategies for this NZEB policy, conceptual framework, understanding the context, the gaps in current policies and legislation, the draft policy document, policy activities overview, and a quick conclusion. Now we're looking at the form of consultation, the objective of the consultation, and the target group. So in devising a strategy to develop this policy document, we have actually gone through a number of phases. And this workshop is actually part of the consultation phase in developing the policy document and refining the input, because it's very difficult to get everybody to agree to what should be included in the policy document. And this is why you're here today, to basically let your voice be heard and let us know what are the priorities what is important to you, and then we'll try and incorporate as much elements as possible in refining the policy document. This document will be done in 2 phases. Phase 1 includes the issue identification, issue analysis, generating solution, and consultation. And at the end of it, we'll have a presentation, which is the written document, and this will be available on the Build Better Jamaica website. In phase 2, we are going to be looking at the implementation phase and the action to drive the implementation, because like most policies, we gone through a process of developing and refining, and then it just sits there. There is no action taken after it's drafted. No quantifiable objective or targets for it to be implemented. So we want to eliminate that by having solid strategies to implement these policies. This was part of the pre-consultation, and I'm seeing some familiar faces here. To develop the conceptual framework, we looked at situating the problem within the context, which is the local context and the international, international context, and how it linked to the sustainable development goals. In addition, we also look at the price of oil locally and how costly it is to do for production and just everyday living. Secondly, we looked at the risk assessment, simplifying the policy document, because we do not want a policy document that is very technical and very difficult to adapt. So we have to be looking at outreach and awareness to include the universities, the Hard Trust NTA as part of the training program to develop the capacity to promulgate the policy document. We also have the expected outcomes, which I'll outline shortly, and we develop an assessment criteria for the document. Now, just to put this in some perspective, globally buildings are responsible for 40% of annual energy consumption and up to 30% of related greenhouse gas emission. World energy demand is projected to grow by over 50%, and Professor Clayton mentioned that earlier, by 2030, with developing countries creating about 75% of that increased demand. This will make it very difficult to meet carbon reduction targets that are incorporated in some of these international policy documents. Regionally, all CARICOM member states depend heavily on fossil fuel to supply their energy demand, except Trinidad and Suriname. TNT is a major producer and only net exporter of petroleum. So the Caribbean countries are among the most vulnerable to global climate and the consequences of global warming. So the impact for us locally is great, because we're a small island developing states, and we will be the first to face the issue of severe impact when it comes to changing in our climatic conditions. The regional approach now. We're looking at embarking on a more sustainable pattern of energy supply and end use for the future through greater utilization of renewable energy and sustainable energy sources. So we are facilitating a more green economy, and Minister Wheatley mentioned earlier, these are some of the strategies that are now being implemented. Facilitating and introducing the principle of cleaner production, encouraging and minimizing the waste through recycling and reuse, and also investigate the concept of carbon neutral building or net zero energy building. Nationally, between 2011 and 2015, an average of 19.3 million barrels of petroleum products per year were imported to Jamaica, and this represents approximately 95% of the energy needs. This means that Jamaica is highly susceptible to oil price volatility, which makes it extremely difficult for Jamaican business to be cost competitive. So if you're looking to trade on the international market, it's going to be very difficult and prohibitive. Putting this in better context, when you look at the sheer petroleum consumption by activity, electricity generation accounts for 31% of the overall consumption, followed by road and rail transportation. The others are there. This graph illustrates the electricity prices for residential consumers. Now, as you can see here, in terms of cost differences between the United States and Jamaica, it's approximately 26 cents per kilowatt more than our neighbor in USA. So this is a major factor in terms of what we are doing locally in terms of renewable energy and how we need to be more conscious of our output and production. This graph shows the sheer electricity sales in Jamaica, and this is the residential portion, and that is the small commercial and industrial sector. So for the residential sector, this is where we're targeting net zero energy building construction. We want to cut this back as much as possible. And then for the small and commercial sector, small and commercial and industrial sector, we are looking to do deep retrofitting, and this, we are using NHT as an example to achieve this objective. These are some of the subsector policies that now exist that are in tandem with what the net zero energy policy is about. So we have the Jamaica energy policy, and if you sweep through the document, you'll see in more detail, a little bit more detail of what the objectives of each one of these policies are. Now, in identifying and reviewing these policy documents, there are some gaps that jump out at you, and these include: one, development orders. The current development orders do not deal adequately with climate change considerations. Secondly, develop and implement integrated sustainable building energy efficiency programs. So we need more of that in the scheme of energy efficiency. Also, we have an absence of quantifiable renewable energy targets and a number of policies. We also need to develop a comprehensive land use plan for the overall policy development. These are some required legislation. One of them is the need for a sustainable building act. Secondly, Renewable Energy Act, Environmental Management Act, and so forth. So what I require from the participant today is for you to list and identify additional legislation that may be implemented to achieve net zero energy building. Just to outline the content of what the net zero energy policy will involve. We'll be having a background and rationale section, the situational analysis that's in chapter 3, looking at the national context, the status of Jamaica's built and construction sector, the international context and the link to the Sustainable Development Goals. We also will be looking at the threats and potential impacts of climate change in Jamaica, the sustainability of the Caribbean single market and economy, which is Keroma as well. Chapter 4 will be looking at defining more specifically what the net zero energy policy is, and we'll focus on the main objective of the policy document, the end result of the application and implementation of this policy document. And if you look at the back of the summary in front of you, you'll realize that you have a sample of recommendations that will be important for you to fill out. All right, so in chapter 5, we'll be looking at the guiding principles for net zero energy development. And in this section, we'll focus on the thematic areas, the architectural strategic design to achieve net zero energy building and what is involved. And also we'll be giving you more detail as to what the prototype building at UWI involves. So in terms of specification and the objectives that they were trying to achieve, we'll focus on that. All right? Chapter 6 will focus on the principle for energy efficient building retrofit, and those are the areas that falls under the retrofit. Chapter 7 deals with the institutional framework for policy adaptation. Then conclusion, the references. Now this is the overall vision of the net zero energy building policy, and that is to create a policy framework that will create a sustainable institutional mechanism to facilitate the development, coordination, and implementation of policies and programs. So I've already explained what some of the objectives are. One is to mainstream NZ development consideration into national policy, because we want it to be a subset of the current energy policy. 2, promulgate and support institutions responsible for climate change research. 3, facilitate and coordinate a national response to Jamaica inefficient building practices and so forth. And these you can view in more detail in the summary document. So I just will skip through some of these. Now, just to touch a little bit on the architectural strategic design to achieve net zero energy building. One thing we have to look at is how to incorporate the building, the system, and the occupants. A lot of times, designers, architects, engineers, they focus more on the building, not so much the occupants, which at the end of the day, the occupants is who you are designing for. So we have to make the building comfortable enough for our occupants. And as a result, we'll achieve a better net zero energy performing building. Right? We also need to look at the operation, the life cycle operation of the building, not just the initial cost. These are the thematic areas: the holistic approach to building design, the dynamic processes, implementation, technical requirements, and the overall performance. Right. So we also need to focus on the supply side that deals specifically with reducing site energy use through low energy building technologies. Example, passive design strategies that includes building orientation, daylighting, ventilation, and so forth. Right? Now, just to wrap up and give you some instruction for the afternoon session. In groups of 6 to 8, what is required is for you to brainstorm and develop some recommendations that deal specifically with the technical capacity building, institutional capacity building, the plans and policies that are required, and the legislation that are required. So if you look again at the back of the document, you'll see a sample of what is required. So in drafting the recommendation, you'll follow the same principle for the development of your recommendation. Now, in the afternoon session, you will now be tasked to select a group leader or a participant or a member of the group, rather, to present 5 minutes, to give a 5 minutes presentation of what the findings are and what the group recommends. Right? So in the afternoon session, you will present 5 minutes presentation, give a 5 minutes presentation or documentation of what the input and recommendations are, following the same format of the sample that is in the summary document. Right? Sorry. Now, in conclusion, the Promoting Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Buildings in Jamaica project addresses 2 key and current interrelated issues. And Professor Clayton mentioned earlier the sustainable energy and the efficient usage and utilization of renewable energy sources. Secondly, climate change, the mitigation and adaptation strategies that are involved.